You have questions? We have answers. Welcome to the Therapist Question Box with your host, Miss Lindsay Schiss.
Welcome back to another episode of the Therapist Question Box, where we are not afraid of anything. So ask away. Today, I have with me Anna Smith. She's a therapist at Therapy Utah and honestly, a wealth of information. When I think of somebody that has resources and when I want to know where to go for a book, a podcast, a reference, Anna is my gal. So Anna, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Lindsay. I am excited to be here.
Awesome. So Anna, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself so our listeners can get a feel for who you are?
All right. So a little bit about myself. I love doing one-on-one therapy. I love connecting with people. Don't love so much podcasts, but I know.
But here we are.
But here we are. But I really do love sharing resources. I love sharing information. I grew up in Houston, Texas. I've been married for 28 years, so I do know a lot about marriage. I joke with people that it's not the perfect marriage. My husband just married the perfect wife.
I like it. Does he know that? Have you let him know about that?
Not true at all, but I like to keep that the thought alive. I really do love talking about marriage, helping people heal. I have 3 kids of my own. They're kind of all grown up. So today's topic was I had to kind of bring myself back to like having little kids. But honestly, this is a topic that anyone needs. Everyone needs.
I agree. I think that regardless of the stage of life we're in, we're going to push up against this question. And so we'll launch right into it. It's really about discussing responsibilities at home. And we'll jump right into our listener's question and get your take on it, Anna. So here's the question. I think I'm doing the lion's share of the household responsibilities and want to figure out how to make it more fair, but I don't want to cause a fight. Do you have any ideas? I mean, I'm sure this listener is alone in this. I'm sure none of us have ever felt this way, right?
Never.
Never, right? I kid. I think this is something that we all have experienced. And like you said, Anna, it might be in different stages of life. And I also think that's an important consideration. What was working at one time in your life might be very different than what's working now. Dynamics might have changed, children in or out of the house. Maybe a spouse is working when they weren't before. So your initial take when you hear that question, about I don't want to cause a fight, but there's some feelings of resentment that I'm hearing in that question.
Yes, when I hear that, I can think of tons of my clients that come in, particularly wives often, and they're like, I shouldn't have to ask for help. There's this expectation that people should see what needs to be done and just step up without any prompting. Husband walks in, kids are arguing, TV's blaring, she's cooking dinner, and she's like, why in the world would you even ask me, what can I help with? Not okay. You should know, you're an adult too.
What's your response to that?
So it's changed over time. But one of the things, my response is, why shouldn't we have to ask?
So the asking's okay.
Asking is really, really important. I kind of tease, but I'm like, how do you know what food your kids like? They tell you. Sometimes they spit it at you, but you ask them, they tell you. There's this communication that has to happen in order for people to know what we like and what we don't like. However, I also would love for spouses, and I say spouses because this goes both ways, for them to see something that needs to be done and not put the responsibility on the other person to hold them accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. So it goes both ways. Responsibility is not just one should be aware and the other should know, but the responsibility is somebody needs to be willing to ask, and also awareness could be increased. So really both partners are accountable here. it makes me think of the book Fair Play. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that book by Eve Rodsky. And I actually just finished that book. And it's really interesting because one of the things that she says that I think is really important is she talks about invisible work. That a lot of the work that we in the household, and I mean men and women, right? That it's invisible. It's hard to actually see what's going on. And so when you said that this, you said a lot of these wives are saying, why can't he see it? But it's actually, she says it's actually a thing that like it feels invisible because it actually is. It just gets done without a lot of people noticing.
Exactly. I love Eve's Fair Play. Her book, she's got a card game. It makes it so simple to kind of look at that. But I don't know that many of us actually give a lot of credence to how much emotional and invisible task we're doing. Eve has this analogy that she uses that, well, for one, like Pew Research and Gallup polls, there were a few of them, have done polls on, who thinks they do more chores, men or women. And women, majority of women believe they are doing more of the household tasks, parenting as well as chores. But when they poll men, they also believe they're doing the majority of the chores.
Oh, that's so interesting. Both partners do.
Can't be true, right?
Oh. Mm-hmm.
Both of them cannot be doing the majority of the task. But she talks about how a lot of times one spouse is only seeing a pond. And they're like, I'm doing 60% of that pond. I'm mowing the lawn. I'm taking care of the cars. I'm taking care of home maintenance. I'm doing 60%, more than my share. What they don't realize is a household and kids and our lives are oceans.
That's such a good analogy. Because what my pond is what I'm probably focused on, right? So if I care about the kids' music lessons or their academics, that's my pond. Whereas my husband's pond might be totally different because it's maybe what he's more focused on and he's engaged in that. Would that be right?
That is exactly right. Well, and okay, so let me give you a little insight into my life. Mm-hmm. I once asked my teenage son, what are you going to do different in your house? And that's like totally dangerous, loaded question. And he's like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that with this, you mom. But I'm like, no, seriously, like what's something you haven't really loved that we do that you're not going to do? And he's like, you're kind of like, I don't like how you'll ask us to do chores. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, it's like you and dad are like, will somebody take the trash out? Will somebody unload the dishwasher? Or by the end of the day, I would like this desk cleaned off. And he's like, you are expecting me, a teenager, to want to do those things. And I don't. He's like, so wow. It's never going to be my pond. It's never going to be my focus.
Wow.
If you tell me, I will do it, but it's not going to be my focus. Now, husbands are different than teenagers, but I thought that was a really great point that it's not something he wants to do, so it's not going to be a priority.
I actually think that's some incredible insight, by the way, from your son, to recognize like, hey, listen, I actually don't care that the desk is messy. It doesn't matter to me. And so I need instructions to tell me if it matters to you, right? So what I'm hearing is if, something in your pond feels overwhelming or you need assistance with, or you need some extra support, that we need to shed light on what that pond is and what those requests are, right? As you know, it's interesting, as you were talking about Fair Play, I played that with my husband just this week. I finished the book in anticipation of the podcast. I thought, let's play the game. And I definitely felt some resistance, like, okay, let's divvy out who does what, right? And Eve is great in her book and saying, listen, things don't have to be 50-50. That's not the goal, but it's to feel like we're both doing our fair share and that it feels equitable in a way. And again, it doesn't mean I have this amount of cards, you have this amount of cards, right? That's how you play the game. But I felt some resistance, and it makes sense, right? I think sometimes we go into this as often as women feeling like, okay, well, I'm doing the lion's share of the household responsibilities, and now I'm going to play this game, and you're going to get more of them. And so I think that same kind of feeling can come up, and our listener asked that, like, how do we approach these conversations? You may not be playing the game, but really without triggering defensiveness or engaging in conflicts. Because I think sometimes people think it's not even worth it. I don't want to have the conversation because it's going to end in a fight, right? Yeah. So what is your suggestion on that?
Okay, so you brought up a few things. Sorry. You brought up a few things, but the biggest point that I want you to look at is like when you're playing that, I want you to get more curious why you felt that resistance. Because honestly, the reason why I became a therapist even was because I had to get really curious about things in my life. Yeah. And all of a sudden, you can't really heal something without like feeling it, seeing that there's an issue, getting curious with it. And so I love that you felt that resistance. And I would say, first, you got to get curious. What is it about this division of labor and you asking for help that kind of is getting in the way?
Can I tell you what I think it is? I'll go ahead and just answer your question. I think it's a couple of things. I think that while my husband, especially as I went back to work, and like our division of labor has changed, and he has stepped up in a lot of ways. And I think there are some things that I feel are definitely invisible. In fact, as we were playing the game, one of the cards was kids breakfast and kids lunch. And he said, you know what? That's like not that big of a deal. We don't even need to deal that card. And I was like, excuse me. No, it is. Because I actually do that every morning. And it felt like that. Like I want to make sure, like, wait a minute, you got to see what I'm doing. Like that actually matters. And I think there's, again, like some of those feelings of past conversations where he's probably felt attacked and maybe gotten defensive. And so, yeah, I think I sit in a place, I appreciate you asking that, because I do think that there's some historical things that have been hard about these conversations, right? And I would imagine a lot of couples feel that way.
I would imagine a ton do, because I'm like, breakfast doesn't matter. I would say that's one of our invisible tasks too in our relationship, because it's like, well, so cereal just magically appears, or eggs get cooked, or
right. That matters. Yeah.
Grocery lists matter, Yeah. And I am really lucky. I have a supportive spouse as well that does a lot, but you have to get curious, like why you're not willing to ask for help. Looking at your past, if you had a single mom that did everything, or an authoritarian dad, or both parents working, that's going to change the dynamics of what you expect. But one of the things that you said was, why even kind of bother, or you asked a question about like, why is this even important to look at? And I would say that if you don't address it, that the invisible task all that time just continues to grow. That ocean gets bigger and bigger, but more importantly, the resentment and bitterness also gets bigger and bigger.
Exactly. As you're saying that, I think that's exactly it. And a lot of times why couples don't have these hard conversations is because like they don't want the outcome, right? There's some historical stuff there. But then what happens? Resentment grows. And all of a sudden you're like, I like this person. I love this person. I chose this person, but I kind of can't stand this person. Right. And it's an important thing to consider your why. I love that you said that. Why don't you want to have that conversation? Yeah.
When this really is a big conversation, like 43% of people report household chores and parenting differences are one of the top reasons for divorce.
Wow. That's like, high.
It is. It's a big, big issue. The top one was career choices.
Oh.
So that was at 46%, but then parenting and household chores are the very next thing. That is why this is important to figure out how we want to divide it, what we want to do. But I will say one of the biggest pitfalls of this is a lot of people don't like to give up control of these things.
Totally.
Well, if I let my husband take over breakfast and he's never done it before, what is he going to buy? Is he going to remember to buy anything?
Mm-hmm.
Are my poor babies going to go hungry? Like,
is he going to buy the terrible sugar cereal that they're going to be starving in an hour? Right. I mean,
right?
I think that is a really important thing, is to recognize where we are saying, no, it has to be done this way. And, there may be a spouse on the other end or a partner that's saying, you know what? No, thank you. Because I'm just criticized no matter what I do. So it's not even worth trying. Nope. I back out. Right. We have to consider our part in this. And really, I will say too, like, we built this city, right? Whether it's from the way I saw my mom do it, the way that society, my culture has told me makes sense for me to do it, that there's responsibility on both ends.
Yeah, I love that you brought up like a city, because Eve also in the Fair Play book talks about how she stopped looking at it just like as her family and put it more in the light of an organization.
Mm.
And she's like, why would I not have some systems in place in an organization? So even when you're talking about that and you're like, we built this city, and I'm like, okay, so I'm mayor of the city.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sweeping up the streets. I'm collecting garbage. I'm cleaning. I'm running the finances. I am all of these things. Is that really what I want?
I love that analogy. Like and saying we've got to create some systems for anything to function in our lives. We create systems, but from a individual perspective, we set an alarm. We have a system, right? And then you think about how society functions. We have systems. We can't just drive wherever we want. There's stop signs and stop lights. Like, we have systems in place. Why would we not do that same thing in our own family, in our own homes? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Do I want a buddy or like a partnership, or do I want something more with my spouse? That also brings us to that next part of conflict, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's not an easy conversation. Like, hey, I need you to see the ocean. And he's like, wait, no, the pond is big enough.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to see beyond the pond. See it. Right. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky, because I would say that I have some expectations that my husband does not have, and vice versa, right? Like, he has some things. He wants that lawn mowed every single week. Do not go over 7 days.
I probably has a certain way he likes it done.
Right.
Yeah.
I want the bathroom cleaned a certain way. And we kind of joked as I was talking about this. He took over laundry. He actually likes doing laundry. Like, wow. I got lucky. I won
a real unicorn. A real unicorn. Right,
a real unicorn.
That's amazing.
But I also have a lot of clothing I like hung dry. Like, I don't want it dry. Now, when he took it over, I tried to be really specific. He tried to meet my expectations. Did I lose some clothing? 100%. I lost some clothing. Like, it got put in the dryer. It was ruined. I can be upset about that. Or I can also just be like, hey, you know what? You're learning. I'm not going to get it right every single time either. But I actually don't want to take the laundry back. So if you don't want to fold the towels in thirds, you want to put them in quarters, great. I've got to let go of some of that, my expectations, so that I actually have more time to do the things that I really want. Is that what I want? The towels folded in thirds? Or do I want to be able to spend time developing myself?
Yes. I think I love that idea that we can't have everything, right? So we get to say, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and let go of the folding towels in thirds thing, because it matters more to me to have time to do the things I want to do. And yeah, it's not going to be exactly the way I want to do it. Or I've done it in the past, and I can be okay with that. Right. So
yes.
I think that's a great reminder. And by the way, the other is true, right? If I'm like, actually, I'm not okay with it. I can't stand it for whatever reason. I'm not okay with it. Well, then that's probably a task that needs to be in your pond.
You need to keep it. Yeah.
Yep.
If it was a deal breaker, keep it.
Yeah.
But I would also say, like, it doesn't have to always stay in your hand. Like, you don't always have to do the laundry. just because he's doing it now doesn't mean in 2 months, if he changes jobs or our situation changes, that he's not going to be able to do it anymore.
Right.
But we go back to that communication piece. Like, so when you played Eve, there are lots of different ways to approach this. Eve's is just kind of a really clear-cut, fair play. Like, I really like it because she's like, once you take on a task, you own it from start to finish. If you say you're going to take over groceries, that means you do find out what kind of cereal. Are we buying off-brand or are we buying name brand?
Yes.
Are we buying toilet paper, Charmin, or are we buying the cheap stuff?
Right. And what she says too about that is she says, you do the CPEs, and that was conceive, plan, and execute. So again, if you're the one doing the groceries, you're also the one doing the grocery list. So that is completely removed from one person and it becomes the other person's task completely. So again, it gives time and space and real estate in your brain that task is no longer yours, but it's been given to your partner, right? So I love that idea. And you're right, you do have to kind of drill down. All right, what kind of toilet paper? What matters here? What are we doing? But I love that idea of this conceive, plan, and execute, that is just that one person's job from start to finish.
And
because that's
communication.
And sometimes that's also that unseen mental space that's taking up time, space in our brains. I call it mental real estate, that it's really taking up some mental real estate. And if I can offload that, then I have more mental real estate to use on things that really matter to me.
The more things we can like automate, kind of.
Yes.
I love Excel. I love organizing. I love my planning. But I used to write like on a piece of paper when company was coming over, I want you to clean the front room. But I felt like I had to be really specific with my family because I'm like, I want the couch cushions straightened. I want the end tables cleaned off. I want them dusted. I want underneath the couch toys picked up, right? Like, and I'm like, why am I recreating this list every single time? This is ridiculous. Now we have a list for when we go out of town, this is what needs to be done in the household. When we have packing list, we have all of these things that, because they were taking up so much space. Oh, Mom, what do I need to pack for this trip? And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can hardly even keep my stuff straight. And now I'm thinking for my kids, my husband. My husband's not going to think of sunscreen and when we go on a cruise or mosquito spray, things like that. In fact, he thinks it's ridiculous sometimes how much I pack. But those are important to me. So that's probably not a chore I would pass over to him.
So you're saying you have lists that are already created. So you'll go and send them the list and say, all right, this is done. And I love that. You kept it so you don't have to recreate it every time, because a lot of times it's the same thing, right? I actually just barely did that myself and have it listed in my phone as things to bring on every trip. And I thought, it doesn't matter where I go. These things I want to take every single trip with me. And I don't want to every time go, okay, I know the clothes and I know, but what else do I need to bring? Like, it's done. And so it's that same principle of offloading it off of your mental real estate, putting it somewhere else and just having a list. But what you're saying is you do it for your family. I think that's a brilliant idea.
But now I don't have that mental space for it, because when I hand you that list, I'm done. Like, if it gets done, if it doesn't, if you bring your swim trunks on the cruise or not, that's not on me anymore. I put it down. I don't have to use that mental space for it. That's the trick, is once you decide to do a process, stick to it. Don't undermine other people and try to take that control back, or it's not going to work.
And what you said about if you forget your swimsuit on a cruise, that's going to be really crappy. I mean, that's going to be very frustrating, right? But as the mom, are you saying, so you're telling me, like, I actually don't swoop in. I say, okay, well, I'm sure you have another pair of shorts and that's what you're going to have to be wearing to go swimming. But I'm not going to come in and make it my problem, because it actually isn't my problem.
Right. And now, obviously, age appropriate, right?
Sure.
I didn't do this when my kids were like 6 and 7.
Sure.
But now that they're teenagers or older, like, no. Like, either we can buy it, we can fix it a different way, but it's not something I need to hover over.
Yes, I have to, as you brought that up, it made me think back when my daughter was 6. She was 6. We went to Idaho and I gave her a list as to what to pack. And she showed up to church and she had 2 different tennis shoes on. And I'm like, I told you to pack, your shoes. And she was like, I did. Well, they were 2 different tennis shoes. And right. I thought, okay, yeah, maybe I need to like scale back a little bit and age appropriate. Right. So you're right. Maybe
Yes.
not at 6, but maybe as a teenager, right. That makes more sense. So I needed this lesson a long time ago. So
I'd also say, Lindsay, like she did get shoes.
she did.
We've got to let go of some of this, like, oh, they've got to look so perfect, All right, well, you brought shoes.
And you know what? You're actually right. She came, she had shoes. It was fine. No, it didn't matter. Right. And sometimes I think it's our own ego that gets in the way. Like, oh my gosh, they're going to think I'm a crappy mom because look at her shoes. She has 2 different shoes on and oh my gosh. It's like, you know what? That's actually more about me than anything else, right? When you talk about curiosity, I think, oh, that goes back to getting curious about myself and, oh, what does it say about me? What am I worried people might think because she has 2 different shoes on?
No, that's exactly where I was like, that is the whole point of getting curious. Why am I unwilling to ask my husband for more help if I need it?
Yep, exactly.
It's this, I'm afraid of the tension that's going to cause. Well, guess what? You're going to have tension if you don't ask.
Yeah, absolutely.
Am I afraid he's not going to like it? Well, I can almost promise you he probably isn't going to love the idea of adding more.
Mm-hmm.
However, if we can do this with more curiosity, you approach it with, hey, I just not like, how do I get my husband to do more work? But how do we partner on this better? How do we create the city that we are both running? We don't love yard work, but I have a couple that I was seeing, and on Saturdays, they're like, neither one of us love yard work either. And so we get up, we make breakfast together, we go out, I'll do the beds, he'll do the edging and stuff like that. And then we always go out to dinner for lunch, we always go out to a restaurant for lunch.
Sure.
And I thought, I could probably implement that in my own life.
Mm.
Right? So it's chores that we didn't love. Now we at least get to be together doing it.
Yes. And it makes it doable, right? And, I do think sometimes we get in this mindset of, over functioning. I do all the things and we get some type of feeling of like, look at me though. I mean, I run this whole thing and this is my city. I'm the mayor and I actually don't even need any city councilmen because look at me. But underneath, I'm so resentful, right? Or I'm exhausted or whatever. But actually, maybe you don't mind that. But I just want to think about there's also another part of this that over-functioning enables under-functioning. And under-functioners and people that are not showing up fully, that actually is not an embodied way to show up in a relationship. And so we're not doing anyone any favors when this dynamic is really off.
Right. Well, and I go back to that city, like, do you really want a city that's only run by one person where no one else has a say? But also, I look at that other spouse that's the under-functioner. He doesn't get a say, but he's also allowed it. He's just like, yeah, well, I don't care. I'll just take whatever I get. I'm like, that's not a way to live either, living on whatever scraps are left over for you. I want you to both say, I want this city, I want this organization, which I would say most people think their home is the most important thing in their life. Their children, their family, their marriage, their relationship. So why don't we give more time to it?
Absolutely.
Why
Amen.
don't we be more curious?
Yep. Amen. And I want to, before we wrap up, I want to make sure that we have covered everything that you feel like. Is there anything I didn't ask or that you feel like, we just really need to make sure to say this before we end?
Not necessarily, but I would say getting curious is going to be your biggest thing. Understanding that there is a lot of invisible tasks. Okay, that is the one thing we left out. I think sometimes our husbands are just like, well, I'm doing just as much as you. Okay, well, I got to schedule all the dentist appointments, which means I can only call between 8 and 5 if they're open every single day. So I also have to go to school and help with the school party. I've got to drive kids back and forth. Like, your time is important. But a lot of women's tasks are done during, they're not negotiable of when they can be done.
Sure.
Breakfast has to be done in the morning, or it's not really breakfast, right? Dinner done at night. Whereas the yard can be done anytime, weekend, it can be done at night after work, it can be done before work. There's a little bit more flexibility. So taking that into consideration when you're making those roles, that and kind of divvying out tasks, that time should be counted towards that task.
Yes, I love that. Time should be counted towards that task. And as you say that, it makes me think that the way we think about time matters, that women's time or men's time is just as important, right? So even if the time is being used, sometimes we think, oh, if they're making money, then that time's more important than this time where we're doing household tasks. And I think we need to consider, how do we think about time? It really matters that the time that we use is actually the same amount every day, and that time being spent doing different tasks is not more important than another person's time. Does that make sense?
Right. And because I'm doing those things, you actually can spend more time at work.
Exactly.
Right. So our time is equal. We've got to have clear roles, but also, like, things can change. Yes. Like we said at the beginning, if I'm old, if I'm young, if I have young kids, old kids, it's all going to be different. So keep checking in, like, keep communicating.
Absolutely. Well, Anna, I really appreciate that. A couple of things I just want our listeners to a few nuggets that they can take away. One thing that I heard that was so important, and we kept talking over and over, was just get curious. Getting curious about, what does this say about me? What am I willing to not ask, right? Or what am I willing to give up? That would be the first thing. Am I willing to give up? And am I willing to get curious about what's going on with my ego? What does this say about me as a mom and as a wife? The other thing is, I heard, ask. Be willing to ask one party, be willing to ask in the other party, be willing to have your awareness increase. Maybe get curious about where your awareness needs to increase. The willingness to have communication about this, that, this may be the way it's always been done, but that we don't want to live in a city, right? As we've been talking about, where resentment just is being, it's being bred. It's just more and more resentment. No, that's not what we're after here, right? We're after a partnership that is fulfilling for both parties. And the other thing that I love that you said was systems, some of the systems of writing things down. So we're not reinventing the wheel every single time, but that when company comes over, this is what we know we need to do. So really helpful. And I think regardless of where we're at in our lives, really applicable information, Anna, and really appreciate your time and your insights. And, again, by focusing on our clear communication and working together, I believe we can set new expectations and have a greater purpose in what we're doing and in our partners, in our partnership. I really hope this was helpful to our listeners. And remember, if you have a question, go to our show notes or to the Therapy Utah website and submit. No question is off limits, and we are here to discuss your questions. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, take care.